You have the talent, you have to also...
Afghanistan. I don't know who else to thank apart from the British, but you know, that's another history I would get into. And of course the second case is the case of Israel, founded on the basis of the religious demand. So he finds parallel, and he's all excited, and he's discussing with me. And we go out for coffee and we have it. The long and the short of the short story is, which I want to get across to you, is most Muslim from Indonesia, and I'm not giving you this my travelogue. I was in Indonesia last year. It is the largest Muslim country in the world. Most people in this room would be obsessed by thinking about Islam as Arabic. The Arab world is only less than 20% of the Muslim world. Okay? And Islam is not Arabic religion, no more than Christianity is a Palestinian heresy. Okay? There is Filipinos who are Christians and Catholics, and Brazilians are Christian and Catholic. So it's a universal faith. And Islam is a universal faith. So I was in Indonesia, as I was saying. Most people, 99% of the people, I would say, that is the common people. I'm not talking now about the middle class and the elite and the intellectual and the government people. Know nothing about Jews, Jewish history, Jewish culture, nothing. You might ask why. You might scratch yourself and say, why? Well, they never meet a Jew. I never met a Jew. Now I have to scratch my head. I did meet Jews because when I was growing up in Calcutta in my grandparents' home, my grandparents were business people and they had apartment buildings, and there were Jews who were tenants in the apartment building. And how do I think about they were Jews? Because later on I realized that they were Jews because they all left after '67 war. And the old ladies in that family, they were my grandparents, my grandmother's buddies. They would always be in the house, but they were dressed in the same white sari, and they had the same sort of white hair, and they looked the same, and I couldn't distinguish one, whether it was my grandmother and who was this lady. She could be my grand-aunt. But that was because I was coming from Calcutta, which is one of the largest cities in the British India Empire. You know. And the people were there from all backgrounds. But most places, there are no Jews. You know the demography of Jews, 10 million. In a world Muslim population of 1.6 billion. You know, it's like trying to figure out some sort of a microbe in a city. In that reference, nobody meets them, nobody hears them, nobody talks to them, there's nobody to go out with. Okay, so the Jew is a stranger, a complete stranger to a Muslim. You might talk about the Arab world, that's a different situation. Okay, so this guy, Ahmad, is now completely taken over. I'm going to worry about him when he gets back to Pakistan. If he does, you know, he starts talking about it, and if something happens to him, then I will be responsible. God save me, you know. But he's reading Herzl, he's reading, you know, Ben Gurion, he's all into this, you know, he wants to know more. And we are talking about this. So that's the flip side of the problem. And then we have the situation, and I think I should be wrapping it up, because I can go on. I want to quickly take a couple of examples here. I brought it along with me, and this is from this week's press. And quickly share with you as example and evidence of what I'm talking about. Let me put it in context, and I refer you to Orwell. All of you know Orwell, 1984 and so on. One of my favorite sayings of Orwell is, the person who controls the present, or who controls the present, controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future. You know, that's why university is so important, schools are so important, education is so important. And of course that's the same applies everywhere, you know, in the Muslim world and Arab world and so on and so forth. So who controls the present? The people who are controlling the present, they have a political agenda. They need power. They need to define an other. They need enemies, etc., etc., etc. This is not in any way an apologetic for Islamofascism. It is to put things in context, as the Ahmad story, the one simple story that I've shared with you this morning or this afternoon. But here is the story, again, this week's press. In fact, it's as fresh as January the 24th. And the story is of my favorite prime minister. I say that with a lot of tongue and we're a little cheap. This is the Malaysian Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, Muhammad Mahathir, who was the Prime Minister of Malaysia, not an insignificant country, a very significant country, one of the richer countries of the Arab Muslim world. But it's not an Arab country, it's a Muslim country, it's a Malay, it's in Southeast Asia, all right? And he was the Prime Minister for almost 25 years. To the 80s, he stepped down in 2003 or 2004. And so he had been head of the government, he had been also head of OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries. Malaysia has been the host country and is a very active member of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, etc., etc., etc. Very, very important country, and economically doing very, very well. And what does he say? He has said this again and again in the past, but he says this only 3 days ago. He says, and I'm quoting him, he says, Jews had always been a problem in European countries. They had to be confined to ghettos and periodically massacred. But still they remained. They thrived and they held whole governments to ransom. Even after the massacre by the Nazis of Germany, they survived to continue to be a source of even greater problems for the world. So we have a Jewish problem, he's saying, and the whole problem in the Middle East is the Jewish problem, and we have to get rid of the Jews. This is not some joker saying this. This is the Prime Minister saying this, who will be feted and dine if he comes to Ottawa. Who will be feted and dine if he goes to Washington. And of course with Obama, Obama will be bowing to him. All right? We have this profound problem. Now, the Malays will be jumping up and down and saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. Ask them, who is a Jew? Have you ever run into a Jew? Have you sat with a Jew? Have you talked with a Jew? Do you know a Jew? Obviously not. That's a huge problem. How do we counter it? Our media is not going to counter it. We have got Zar Harun Siddiqui dominating the major paper in the city of Toronto. Right? So you're not going to have the media, the main paper in all of Canada is Toronto Star going to challenge it. You won't have Globe and Mail challenging it. You won't have anybody challenging it except Kathy Shadle challenging it. You know? But yeah, that's the problem. And our politicians won't stand up and they won't talk about it. They will knuckle, as Obama does, and knuckle several fold over because they're afraid to be called a racist or an Islamophobic, okay? So that's the problem. Flip side of it. And so we then have the argument that this is the problem of Islam. This is the problem of Muslims. This is the problem of Quran. That this is anti-Semitic. Detail and long answer, but this is the thing that is what is. That to be a Muslim is to be programmed in the DNA code to hate the Jew. You know? That's again a common perception that has grown up and is getting louder and louder. And it deserves, I mean, there is a rational explanation for that. What do you do with a guy who's 23 years old, put plastic in his underpants and wants to blow up a plane? What is he, the Muslim? He wouldn't be able to possibly, you know, do a algebraic equation of simple sums, but there he is, he can bring down a plane with 300 people on it. And when you ask him who's taught you to do this, he will say Islam. And so here's my counter example, and this too is from this week's paper. And it is an article, and this is something I've been talking and writing about. This is an article by Professor Stephen Flout in Jerusalem. And Professor Stephen Flout is responding to Professor Shlomo. Has a problem. We all know that. It is that traditional Islam, and the Quran in particular, explicitly acknowledge that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. And so he continues. Let me explain, he says. The Quran itself is extraordinarily clear about the status of the land of Israel in Islam. While in general criticizing Jews for their supposed sinfulness, which the Jewish Bible, something the Jewish Bible does quite a lot also, the Quran relates in Surah 5:21 that Moses, quote unquote, tells the Jews to enter into the holy land which Allah has assigned to you. Moses adds to his people, again quoting the Quran, O my people, remember the bounty of God upon you when he bestowed prophets upon you and made you kings and gave you that which had not been given to anyone before you amongst the nations. O my people, enter the holy land which God has written for you and do not turn tail, otherwise you will be losers.